What's a mook?
A mook? What's a mook?
I don't know.
What's a mook?
Well, for instance, the one we watched tonight, and Oliver and I did just watch a movie tonight, All Quiet on the Western Front, the 2022 version of the film. I don't know, we didn't really talk about it after watching it. We just watched it a couple hours ago. And what did you think about the movie?
I really liked it. It'll be interesting to see in time how much I'll remember this movie, because there's other great war movies I've seen, but I only saw them once, and I don't know if it's just getting older with my memory, but yeah, certain movies I'm like, I'll end up kind of remembering little small things, but I think this is a not bad comparison to what we just saw, would be the movie 1917.
Yeah, I was going to mention that one too.
And I remember really enjoying it, and I was very impressed with a lot of it, but there's not a ton of things I remember about that movie. If I was to bring them up.
Yeah, in terms of specific scenes or moments and stuff.
Yeah.
And see, that's the sort of thing where I could see myself wanting to rewatch a lot of these, you know, in subsequent years, probably around this same time of year. I tend to like reserve horror films for October, and I reserve war films for November. But I would like to rewatch 1917, and I'd like to rewatch All Quiet on the Western Front and become more familiar with it. It's just, I find it quite an enjoyable experience to watch, even as though they're like, you know, showing like the brutality of war or whatever. I don't know. This movie, beautiful to look at for one thing, just because in spite of the gore and all the hardcore people getting mutilated and stuff, it's just shot really beautifully. And there's a lot of great compositions and color, and wow. What a gorgeous film to look at. And it did win the Academy Award for cinematography as well. And no surprise, really.
Yeah, I think rightfully deserved. I think that's definitely one of the highlights of this movie is the cinematography. It's probably the first thing you notice when you start this film. But I think with war movies in general is, you know, there's just been, at this point, there's been so many war movies, especially 20th century wars. More World War II movies than World War I, but there's obviously a fair amount of World War I movies, and probably to some degree there's war fatigue with audiences in war movies. It's like maybe like how many can you really watch? And so I think now when they make them, the thing to really make them stand out if you're going to do a modern one is, you know, do find that they're getting much more cinematic. I find that with both 1917 and All Quiet on the Western Front. Like they're just very beautiful. In some ways it's like ugly material that you're looking at, but it's shot as beautifully as it can. Like a lot of these sort of like sweeping, almost kind of like crane shots.
Yeah.
I mean, Roger Deakins shot 1917, and he's probably the biggest modern cinematographer right now, maybe.
Yeah,
I don't know. He's up there, and I'd say like his work in that movie is one of the highlights.
That also won the Academy Award for Best Cinematography again too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, these movies share that in common. They're really impressively shot, beautiful to look at. Of course, the big gimmick, I guess you would say, with 1917 was that it was all designed to be like a one-shot film.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that's a really interesting and cool way of, a unique way of telling that kind of story, you know, in terms of creating this immersive experience, which I think there's a number of war films that really try to do that, where they're trying to put you in the action of like a war scenario. Obviously, Saving Private Ryan did it quite famously, and to a lot of great praise by actual war vets. 1917 does it very effectively by doing the one-shot thing. And then this movie does it as well through a whole bunch of different sequences. But what you're saying about like the war fatigue, it's like, yeah, if you line up those three movies and watch them all in a row, it's like, wow, how many more, you know, trench warfare can I endure for just before it becomes desensitizing or a little bit boring to some degree, where you're like, okay, more explosions and dirt flying in my face and crawling in the mud.
Like, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who are much bigger war fans than you or I, and they probably watched every kind of war film that they can get their hands on. And so those are the people I kind of am curious about. You know, they probably have like the highest expectations of, you know, show me something different, you know, because they've seen it all. And so it's like, well, what's the point of seeing another thing unless you're going to kind of take it in a little bit of a different place? You don't have to necessarily even like top the last great thing, but you got to do something different. You can't show me exactly what the previous movies did. The violence seems to improve more and more, and I think that's kind of where actually CGI effects can actually be very useful, where if it is like a long shot, where it's all done in one. You can kind of, have a sort of an actor with a clean face, and then as they maybe fall down, you could add some digital effects, to make it look more like a corpse or somebody who's really wounded.
Yeah, well, for instance, some of the sequences in this movie, there's like that scene where he's bashing the guy's face in with his helmet, and I don't know exactly how they did that, but it's like each time he gets hit, his face is more and more battered up, and more bloody, and I'm kind of curious what they did to create that sort of effect. War films, or they'll be based off like, the life of Oscar Schindler or the life of Private Ryan. No, just kidding. I don't think that's a real story, is it?
It's not. I don't think it's a real story, but there's probably some truth to a situation like that happened in real life. Like, I'm assuming that there probably was written law that, if you have so many siblings that are all being signed into the war, if 4 of the 5 die, you get your 5th son saved, and he gets to go home. I could easily see that being a rule. I mean, they kind of go into that in Saving Private Ryan. Like they don't go into long detail, but that seems to be an established rule in, I don't know, the military system, at least at that time. I'm sure there had to have been probably at least one situation where that played out. Where there was just a guy who all of his brothers were killed, and I don't know whether there was a story about a whole platoon, having to go and find him. I don't know. Maybe there was easier ways.
Yeah, it's kind of like Saving Private Ryan sort of set this standard for realism, and then a lot of war films since then have actually risen to the occasion and delivered some very convincing, believable, realistic on-screen graphic violence scenes. And it's now sort of like the expectation,
Yeah, as I think it should be. I mean, if you're going to do a war movie, it better be brutal.
Yeah. Well, and depending on what you're trying to showcase too, like what the perspective is, I guess, there's a variety of different war movies that the perspective they're showing isn't necessarily one of being right there in the trenches. They're putting the audience more in the position of military commanders, or it's more like a political war film.
I apologize, sir, for not telling you sooner that you're a degenerate, sadistic old man. And you can go to hell before I apologize to you now or ever again.
Or if you're like a fighter pilot, or maybe you're stuck in a submarine.
Oh, yeah, totally. Very different kind of movie, hey?
I think Saving Private Ryan is a great war movie, and yet I do think that there are some flaws to it. Like, I don't consider Saving Private Ryan to be the end-all World War II movie, but I feel like maybe a lot of people kind of do sort of feel that is the one. Yeah,
it's not my favorite. Like, there's things that I'm not overly... I feel like there's not a lot to it, for one thing.
Yeah. I'm not really crazy about, like, literally, like, the Saving Private Ryan premise. Like, I don't mind if that was part of it, but just to kind of make the whole... I kind of relate more to the soldiers in the mission being like, what the hell?
I mean, where's the sense of risking the lives of the 8 of us to save one guy?
Doesn't make any sense.
The thing I think that everybody talks about when you talk about Saving Private Ryan, it's the D-Day, 45-minute sequence at the beginning, which I think we can all agree was amazing. We had never seen a war scene depicted like that before. And that is the highlight of the movie, no question. And I think the problem is that the movie never reaches that level again.
Yeah, it kind of tries to go there with some more battle sequences and stuff, but it's like once that one's already been done, and that's kind of the way that I feel about it, is that it's kind of this sequence, a series of really well done battle sequences, but that more or less encompasses the movie.
Like, I just feel like emotionally, like I just felt a lot more from a movie like Platoon, or even some other, even Apocalypse Now, as opposed to Saving Private Ryan. There's certain parts in Saving Private Ryan that actually come off to me very like kind of Hollywood, almost like a throwback to like the old like 1950s World War II movies. Just like moments where when it's just kind of like the soldiers, it's like the downtime when they're just kind of like and kind of like chit chatting, and you're kind of starting to get to know their characters. They do kind of seem a little bit like cookie cutter, a bit like, oh, there's the sarcastic guy, there's the wimpy guy, there's the big tough Vin Diesel guy.
A little formulaic. That's probably the right word that I was looking for to describe War
Horse. It didn't feel like
formulaic.
What the people back then would have actually, talked and sounded like.
Did you ever watch the movie Patton?
No.
And so Patton, I was going to say, is a very like plot driven sort of movie, you know, because it's all about, you know, this battle takes place and this event leads to that and that sort of thing. Some great dialogue in that movie too. Like Francis Ford Coppola was a writer on it.
Okay, that must have been who I was thinking of. But yeah, no, the main thing I just know with Patton is just that kind of famous like poster image of like George C. Scott in front of that giant American flag.
So the movie starts out with him giving this great speech in front of that American flag. It's a great way to start the movie.
I want you to remember that no bastard ever won a war by dying for his country. He won it by making the other poor dumb bastard die for his country.
It's also got really excellent music by Jerry Goldsmith, I'm pretty sure is the composer.
Great.
But it is totally like, I would say, an American heroism movie.
Yeah.
General Patton is the hero of the movie, you know? And
Yeah.
I think George C. Scott probably won the Academy Award for that movie.
I think you're right, yeah. Well, there's one I definitely wanted to bring up because I think this one would be on my top 5 list. It's a really brutal movie. It might be maybe the most brutal of the war movies on my list.
Okay.
And it's also a foreign film. It's called Come and See.
Come and See. I haven't heard of that.
It's from the mid-'80s. I think it's a Russian movie.
Here, let me read this to you because I just looked it up here. So
Sure.
1985,
Yeah.
after finding an old rifle, a young boy joins the Soviet resistance movement against ruthless German forces and experiences the horrors of World War II.
The whole movie, yeah, you're following this boy who's probably no older than like 12 or 13. And they put this kid through hell. I mean, you could see it in the movie. You're just like, fuck, this kid was like a real trooper. And like by the end of the movie, he looks like he aged 5 years.
Wow.
I mean, but that's the thing is by the end of the movie, you're like, that's the face of war right there.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit of a slow burn. It kind of starts off where he's almost just kind of like wandering in Eastern Europe, kind of in the woods. And he comes across this young girl of the same age and they hang out and they're kind of just kids being kids. And it's the one part of the movie that maybe just has just a nice, like, peaceful moment before things just get really bad. And I don't know, it's one of those movies where it almost feels like a little bit documentary-like. Like, it really just feels real and genuine. Like, I don't know, when you watch a lot of other movies, you're kind of like, this is a movie, but you watch this one, you're kind of like, this seems like what the experience would really kind of be like. They just don't hold any punches back with this one.
Yeah.
And I mean, I often see this movie on a lot of lists of like most controversial movies or most shocking movies or like, you know, most intense war films. And so I was just kind of like, I gotta check this thing out. And
Yeah, you're kind of making me curious.
If these movies are made recently enough, a lot of them do just tend to look really good, even though some of the stuff you're looking at is pretty grotesque. Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know if I've ever like seen.
So is it in Russian then?
I believe so. It's not in English.
Okay.
But it's also, there's not tons of dialogue.
How many times have you seen this? Because I'm curious.
I've seen it once.
Okay, so going back to what we talked about some of these movies being memorable, do you find it to be memorable? Like you can kind of remember the beats of what goes on?
I mean, I will say I forgot the element about the kid finding the gun at the beginning, but once you reminded me of it, that all came back to me.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. I'm a really big fan of kind of simple but poignant like openings and who just digs out this gun and finds it, and you're kind of just sort of like, okay, this is how we're gonna start the movie. I like this, but it's like, okay, he's found a gun. We're gonna send you off to war, man. You're a man now.
Yeah.
And it is a movie that. It doesn't have that rewatchability to me the way Platoon does, where I genuinely enjoy the experience of rewatching Platoon. While Come and See is a movie I'm definitely going to watch multiple times, but I'm really going to pace out the distance between the times I watch it because it's not a feel-good movie at all. Like, the time you're done with it, you're just like, ugh, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Because again, it's like an experience, so you're like, yeah, I'm good. I don't need to experience that again for a little while.
Yeah, I hear you.
But it's definitely worth watching. Like if you're a big fan of war films, like this is a must see because it's kind of a forgotten one, mainly because it's not an English movie. And so it doesn't make a lot of lists because I think a lot of times they want to fill it up with kind of like American war films. But this one is as good as any. When it comes to these foreign movies, I think I just trust them a little bit more than Hollywood because Hollywood's like they're built on kind of delivering magic and things larger than life. And I think with these foreign movies, they just aren't really able to do that So their strength is the complete other end. They're like,
Yeah.
let's make it a little bit more simple, but real.
Well, and the other thing is you get like, for starters, you get a different perspective from people from different cultures. It's like they haven't been brought up with sort of the Western perspective on the war. But the other thing is I think every culture just offers different sensibilities for how you're going to make things. And again, that's one of the reasons why foreign cinema tends to be very interesting, is because the influences are different. And I don't know, I definitely think it's worth it to check out some of these foreign films, I think.
Yeah. Well, the nice thing about like by having it through the perspective of a child, it felt like it was a fairly like unbiased movie. It wasn't trying to do what I do find a lot of maybe more of Hollywood movies do, where they're kind of like, we're the good guys and they're the bad guys.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of what I mean by the Western perspective, right?
Yeah.
Is it's like that's kind of what you're gonna get.
With the European movies, it's like the situation is the bad guy, and you, the kid who just got thrown into it, are the innocent.
And
but,
that's so often the way that it is with war and stuff, right? Like there's so many people who just innocent people who want nothing to do with it, but they just kind of get roped into it just because they happen to be in the wrong environment or in the wrong geographic location or whatever.
You're just kind of put in a situation where it's like kill or be killed. That's that the reality that you're in.
There's nothing fair about it or whatever. It's just very circumstantial.
Yeah. Battleship Potemkin.
No. Great. I have seen that.
Oh, you have? Oh shit! I was gonna
we watched that in film school actually, and that we had a good little study of that, of just like kind of on the principle, the lesson of cutting and juxtaposing images and how you can like tell a story through the technique of Soviet montage.
I finally watched it just like last year, and it was like a very good restoration, and I was I had heard so much about the movie, but I was surprisingly impressed. For a silent movie of the 20s, I was very impressed with what I saw.
Quite engaging, actually.
Yeah.